So good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon session. I hope everyone had a good lunch break, is re-energized, and important is not falling asleep now after having eaten. My name is Tobias Westermeier. I'm going to be your moderator for this session, which is about how we can integrate the Treasury function into the wider office of the CFO remit, strengthen collaboration across the CFO stakeholders, and how to create value for the business like this. For this discussion, I think we were very fortunate to win very interesting panelists that bring a vast experience from various finance functions, roles in different companies, and also in different jurisdictions, geographies. With that, I would like to introduce the panel. First, please welcome Maike. She has a unique dual background as a group treasurer and head of FP&A at Allseas, combining cash flow forecasting, the strategic, forward-looking strategic view, and also has a seat at the table for strategic decision-making, shaping decisions on capital allocation and growth. I'm very much looking forward to these very special insights, and thank you for being with us today. Next, please welcome Patrick. He's also coming with a whole range of experiences in financial services as a corporate banker, as a group treasurer at Savvy Games. I think you have won even a Treasury Award this year with the team in the Middle East, so congrats again for that. And also as a CFO in various roles, entities, group CFO. So looking forward to have your 360 view insights into the topic, and thanks for joining us. And to round up the panel, Paul, who has also a very extensive experience as a CFO, group treasurer, head of corporate finance. I had the pleasure of working together in a former life with Paul, also from different companies, right? Working in Germany, UK, and Switzerland. And currently you're a strategic advisor, finance advisor at a scale-up business in the aerospace sector. So very much looking forward also to these insights and contrasting maybe what office of the CFO Treasury means at a smaller growth company versus all the experiences from the past. So thanks all for joining. And maybe just to briefly set the scene on the topic before we jump into the first question. If we look at Treasury, right, Treasury has been traditionally seen as the guardian of cash, the manager of liquidity and financial risks. And I think when we deal with our clients, we see a whole range of treasury scopes that are in place. But what we often realize is that the treasury function is still not fully integrated into the office of the CFO and is necessarily collaborating across the CFO stakeholders and verticals. So we often see silos and siloed decision making. But there are clear benefits for collaboration. A unified financial view, sharper decision making, and with that also a bit the theme of today, what Lawrence said earlier today, stronger resilience in a volatile and uncertain world. So we will explore with this panel three themes. What are the challenges for integration? What are the difficulties to achieve it? What are the opportunities for better integration within the office of the CFO and also the value add, and then also practical insights on the how-to. And with that, I would start and open up, Paul, to you the first question. From your experience, what makes integration between Treasury and other CFO functions so difficult? Where are the barriers? What needs to be overcome?
Well, that assumes that there are barriers and that you're not integrated or aligned. It's not necessarily integration, but alignment, I think, is important. Treasury very used to dealing with tax. Often as this morning was mentioned, tax and Treasury often go together. But as you go across the CFO responsibilities, particularly I think to FP&A, I think the alignment between Treasury and FPA becomes a little bit stretched. And if you think about the Treasury world, which is one of often the nuts and bolts of the balance sheet, of the funding, of the liquidity management, of the bank accounts, and the FPA has these outputs, high-level outputs of the financial results. So, how do we integrate or align better, I think? And based on my experience, one of the most recent companies I worked for, we had over 1,600 legal entities in 100 countries around the world. It's a crazy number, but that was the business model, risk management model. But so you had this process whereby you had your accounting goes into consolidation once a month, then consolidation do their stuff, and then the FP&A takes over and then they produce their report. So by the time you have this output compared to what the inputs are, the Treasury, you look at this and say, well, what's the relevance? And in my experience, Treasury has to have a role in each step along the way. And that, and how easy that is or how difficult it is depends on how integrated you are in terms of processes. And as an example, in this company that I mentioned, you had such a large number of legal entities. When the consolidation had completed their first round of consolidation, I'd go to them and say, can I look at it now? And they say, well, why do you want to look at it? And I say, well, because we need to check on the balance sheet. I can't tell you if the sales are right, but just to look at the balance sheet. And to start off with, they didn't understand it, but then I would go back to them and say, look, it's just as well you haven't sent this forward because I can see this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong because of the validation process based on what Treasury was expecting and what actually came out. And as you go through that process, you then go to the FP&A, and FP&A generally has somewhere at the appendix a P&L and a balance sheet, and again, Treasury should be part of that exchange of what's coming out. Not necessarily, we can't talk about markets, we can't talk about product sales, but in that respect, I think Treasury does have a role to play in validating, and how easy that is depends on how integrated you are.
Yeah, you talk very much about alignment, but I think it's also sometimes a bit the reputation that Treasury has within a company. I work for Allseas, a very innovative company, and often it sees as, Treasury is risk averse. Let's not involve them because they will say no. And I think that also that perception needs to change, and that's also by the Treasury to change that perception. Furthermore, I see very much that FP&A is often in the lead of the planning cycles, and that they often make a kind of cash forecast based on the indirect method that Treasury we don't like at all, and that totally doesn't align with the direct method. So I think by aligning in these functions, you get a much better forecast on that.
I think it's very artificial what we're talking about the silos. Each one, and maybe you should think about it. You know the Grinch, no? Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas future. And that is a little bit. Accounting is doing what happened in the past. And these people in FP&A, I don't know what they're smoking, but they're version 31 and version 32 of the future budget. They are doing the future. And the only thing that really matters is the present. Thank God, since Enron, we know that we cannot trust accountants anymore. And since that moment, things like EBITDA and that kind of strange concept have disappeared. And we go to cash flow per share and cash flow. And that is really only truly what matters. And tax authorities have seen the same, and that is why they introduced BEPS, the 2 pillars of BEPS, because they say the only way how we get money in the future is not going after the statements. This morning I woke up and Trump just abolished the quarterly reports in the SEC. And that is going to happen. Countries like Brazil, you don't have to do your annual return anymore. You don't have to send your tax statement. We will tell you based on your bank flows, your cash flow, how much tax you have to pay. And that is going to be the future. So I would say there will be a diminishing importance of accountants. Who needs accountants? Second, there will be a diminishing reporting of FP&A in the future. So Treasury becomes core. Let me leave it with that.
That's a beautiful message
I would
to this
love
audience.
to respond to it. You know, you say Treasury becomes core, we own the cash flow, totally true. But how do we really own the cash flow? Often we're just consolidating information we receive from other entities, countries, etc. But do we really own and understand the cash flow and the future cash flow?
And just to come in on that, I think that when we talk about cash flow forecasts, every CFO says, I want a cash flow forecast. Great. Well, you know, what cash flow forecast do you want? Do you want one for the next week? Because the one that Treasury might use, they might use one for cash management, for liquidity, even a bit longer for funding. What's the CFO after? What does he want? Because he probably wants something a bit different. And it's a question, where does that come from? Who makes that? Because you talked about the derived cash flow forecast coming from FP&A and Treasury. In my view, they should be the same. And Treasury, if there is a derived one, Treasury should be able to follow that. And if you can't, then there's an issue. And you need to resolve that somehow. But I think the key issue, from my point of view, is defining, when you say we need a cash flow forecast, who needs it and why? And the answer to that is probably you need 3 or 4 cash flow forecasts. I mean, that's the true answer to it, depending on who needs it and for what.
Okay. So from you, I heard cash flow forecasting, then a timing mismatch between what is happening over a month between the different functions. I think, Michael, you talked a bit about culture, differences between how each CFO department looks at each other and also how Treasury is perceived. Patrick, you questioned fundamentally why certain functions are needed and if they are going to be needed in the future. Maybe a follow-on on this, because I hear a lot about alignment and moving together purpose, what cash flow forecast is needed for what purpose. How to reach this alignment of processes, and also what role do systems then play? I mean, FP&A systems versus the Treasury system. What are your experiences and thoughts there?
On the system side, so Treasury, of course, works with the Treasury management system. Business control has the ERP system, and then we have FP&A using an enterprise performance management system. And you need to bring this together, and the way how we do it is basically use this data, and we all work in the same model, all functions, and that's how we integrate it together. So we do not have a separate system for it. Unfortunately, Excel, Power BI comes to play again in order to manage this, but eager to hear whether you have any other solutions.
It will become much better. It will become much better. And if you look at what the opportunities that AI bring us now, expect 80% of the people who are working in FP&A and 80% of the people who work in McKinsey to lose their jobs in the next years. Basically, you don't have to write a report anymore. It will be done. The only thing that you have to do is to control and double check the report. And the same will happen in accounting. What Paul mentioned, that he had 1,600 people. Well, there were no 1,600 accountants in these 1,600 companies. You had shared service center where you do the depreciation and you hit it with IFRS norms everywhere, except Brazil, where they have a different depreciation table. But in most countries, you can do centrally accounting. The accounts receivables, the accounts payables are very easy. That's processes. That's invoices from the POS to the CRM to the ERP, and it goes all smooth through. So the accountants, the AR, the AP, the shared service centers, they will be gone. There will be some supervisors there to switch on the light and the air conditioning on, but that's it. FP&A, 80% will be done, and only predictive analytics will come out of that. In Treasury, you will see the same. I do think that in Treasury, systems will become so important that really a treasurer doesn't need a financial education anymore. It's much more useful if he is a data analyst. I think you all who have sons and daughters, we're not that young anymore, we have sons and daughters in universities, well, make them data analysts rather than an MBA, because an MBA is a waste of money. There will be 3 functions in Treasury, thanks to systems, thanks to the integration, and thanks to AI, and thanks to the integration of systems. Thanks to Zanders, who integrates it everything, no? Who puts our Kariba to talk to our Oracle. But the important thing is there will be 3 functions in Treasury left over. One is compliance, and I include risk management in compliance, basically to make sure that it happens. Second is data analytics, and that is replacing slowly the whole FP&A part. And the third one is banking relations. Where do I get the liquidity that I need for running my business? And that comes out of the need that is established in the predictive analytics and the data analytics. So I would say systems are core. Treasury will mainly be the management of data rather than the management of liquidity. And it will have to do with risk management embedded in a compliance sector.
Well, I think that's a very interesting and futuristic world. I think from the first presentation we saw this morning, it was interesting to see that the actual level of use of AI still is relatively limited. So, and I'm not sure, I don't doubt that what you're saying will happen. It's a question of time. And is it our children or our children's children? I don't know. But the reality is, as at today, we need to manage what we've got as best we can with the tools that are available. And AI is brilliant. You can use it for a lot of things already, up to a point. And I think we're all embracing it. It's just a question how far it goes. At this moment in time, I think many companies, I happen to be working at the moment for a relatively young company, didn't exist 4 years ago. This year we'll probably have 450 million of sales, 4 bases in 4 different countries. I can tell you it's nuts and bolts firefighting all the time across the finance function. Very interesting, but AI is relevant to the product we're making, but in terms of making a finance and indeed Treasury subset of that work, it's not there. So it's the single system platform for accounting, and then FP&A being done on a very nice Excel file, and that's the reality.
Okay. And if you contrast maybe your experience in mature organizations from the past with the current experience, how do you see the interaction CFO, Treasury, or let's say the functions that resemble what the different classic functions are supposed to deliver? How do you see this, and also what are maybe the difficult areas and the touch points?
Well, you have an inevitable resource issue, and you can't have people sitting up in ivory towers, so everybody has to roll their sleeves up, but one of the things that I'm trying to help is establish a finance organization that looks similar to sort of things that most of us would know in a multinational organization, where you have the function. We're talking about shared services, a little bit early for that maybe, but I'm actually, interestingly enough, working on Treasury and FP&A at the moment. It's kind of unusual, but because they didn't have anybody else to do it. And we are making do with what we have. We are filling in gaps as and when they're identified based on need. Not super efficient like a major multinational, but we make it work.
Okay, maybe moving on to the next theme and looking to Patrick. what are the opportunities? I mean, you have alluded already to some futuristic view of the finance function, but also based on your experiences from the different organizations, what value is it that an integrated treasury with other functions can bring to the business?
I agree. I thought something that Paul said in the beginning was very interesting about tax. That tax and treasury always go together, and I think that is the future. We will see much more integration. Actually, my first position that I had as a young corporate treasurer in Atlanta, I was working for DSM, for a Dutch company, and the tax director, he always called us the tax planning implementation department rather than the treasury department. And to a certain extent, that was true. Let's not forget that most transactions have tax consequences. Whether you sell to third parties or you sell internally, internal transactions are worse because they're always subject to withholding tax, and countries realize that multinational corporations are paying a very low amount of taxation, and they will be going after your cash flow. So withholding tax causes that tax and treasury always have to be aligned. And that is something that I think is important. I do think FP&A and treasury can work together. We are both very data intensive. I think if you look at the battle about who is going to dominate data, that is probably the battle where you see whether FP&A and treasury will remain separate or become a merged owner of the data in companies. And I think that is very important. So I would say the silos still exist, but the silos that we see in the future are much more compliance towards the stakeholders that are external, and that have to do with tax and treasury, or the management of data. And that is the combination between the two silos of FP&A and treasury, where Paul is responsible for currently. No? So I would say that is an important tendency. I think for the CFO, he needs both. He needs the data. Remember, often you say that the CFO is the co-pilot of the plane together with the CEO who's flying the plane. And it is indeed, he can only be providing value to his CEO if he has the data and if he has the tools and he have the qualifications, meaning the knowledge, to bring information to his team. And it will be much more data intensive.
Well, I was just going to add in terms of looking at the numbers, and Treasury tends to look at legal entities, balance sheets, to a certain extent the P&L. FP&A, it tends to be consolidation, product markets, and I remember an interesting discussion where FP&A was talking about the most profitable country with the most profitable product. And I thought, well, I'll look at the balance sheet, and you had this country, I won't say which it was an Asian country where we were making lots of cash, and which was really good. But then I said, well, that cash is only worth what the amount that you can get into the hands of the shareholder. And to get that cash out of that location into the hands of the shareholder, i.e. the topco, we would have suffered 40% tax hit. And so, nobody had really registered that before. And that's, again, I think, Treasury, that dialogue needs to exist. It needs to exist across the finance function with the CFO based on the information that's available. But it's also very important for the Treasurer to take the lead in that kind of understanding, looking at legal entities. Because there was an assumption at the FP&A reporting, this is great, which it was, but actually in terms of cash and earnings, because you can get the cash to the center, but you need to get the earnings to the center as well, we would have incurred a very significant tax hit. Just an interesting example.
Okay.
I think when FP&A and Treasury work together, collaborate together, they can provide an insight that exceeds, I think, current expectation. So what we are working on is like We have the P&L aligned, we have the cash, we have full visibility. And what we are now working on is running several scenarios, both departments together, so that we can really determine the optimum capital employed. Also, because of these insights that we have, we are now actually at the table to determine together with management on the prioritization of investments. Like I said, we have a lot of innovations going on. Treasury is at the table to determine this. So I think if working together, you will really be at the strategic table and discussing with management on other things than just cash.
Okay, that's very interesting. So you're talking essentially about capital budgeting. I mean, actually a classic topic that people would learn in finance classes, but does not often appear in Treasury.
Not at all.
And how do you really put that into practice? I mean, is it an org structure? Is it formalized committees? Is it how does that happen? Because I think that is often the crux.
So on the how, actually this didn't happen overnight. I'm already with Allseas for 12 years. I started off as the group treasurer, but I became very much involved in the long-term planning just out of my own interest. And I also got a lot of, interfered with it, commented on it, asked questions. And at one point in time, the CFO said, okay, you have so many questions, do it. And I think that was a big step because he let go of the original FP&A and treasury silos and put the department actually together. And that's where the magic started actually. And that's where treasury became, part of the planning cycle. Normally we operate on treasury on our own planning cycle. We have our own forecast. It's not aligned with budget forecasting of the company. And that's when it started. And also I see a few treasurers here in this room. Get out, talk to the commercial department, talk to operations, talk with procurement. We have a big innovations department. We're on it. We regularly walk by to see what's going on, know what's happening in your company. And FP&A really supports that as well, to get to know what's going on in your company. And for me, that's the most important part, to get at the table and be taken as a strategic partner.
Okay.
And sorry, you asked also the question on, is it kind of... how is it embedded in the organization? It kind of grew, We started a bit bottom up, and then managers became aware of it. They were asking us questions, and now Treasury, their approach, like commercial, none of the tenders will be sent out without Treasury looking at it. Go ahead.
And I think that's true. It's very important to work with the internal stakeholders. Think about a traditional industrial company, that makes cups like this. If you make a cup like this, it first starts with research and development, then it starts in modeling, then it starts in production, then you have the sales force trying to sell the cups, and then you have to receive the money. All of that is cash flow negative. That all these periods are negative until somebody pays something. If you don't talk to your development departments, to your accounts receivables, your production, your engineers, your inventory people, your procurement people, you might end up with very fancy plans about product development that don't show a cash flow. And most cash investments, most inventions, most production lines are cash flow negative up to the moment of maturity. And that is why it's so important to work with all your stakeholders internally. And I would say either you do it or FP&A do it. But as I mentioned before, I think slowly both departments will integrate in something that is the management of data that includes the asset liability management of your balance sheets. I think the risk and the risk management of an asset liability management. Remember that if you have a P&L and you have a balance sheet, you cannot do anything for the future with that. You need a cash flow to project a future balance sheet. You cannot project a future balance sheet without a cash flow, because you can never see what happens with the AR, the AP, and the inventory components in the next year's balance sheet. And for that reason, data is very predominant in Treasury, and I would say that together with talking to your stakeholders will allow for future projection of asset liability management.
Essentially what you're describing is a holistic understanding of the financial supply chain, beginning maybe with the big picture cycle of understanding what the business is doing, investments, financing, etc. But then also the shorter cycle, working capital management. I think what we often see is that working capital management, surprisingly, is not a topic at all in various treasury functions. Is this also an opportunity to get much closer to the business? I mean,
I think it's detrimental to get closer. I basically asked the CFO of Allseas. He recently joined, and he said, "Oh, this treasury is so different. You know everything. You know what a project is, whether there are any issues on the capex plans." And he said, like, yeah. You need to understand the business, otherwise you have no right at the table, to be there. You should just produce a little cash forecast. Yeah.
And Paul, something stuck in my mind. You said Treasury should take the lead in cross CFO discussions, but does Treasury always have the mandate to really do that? To take the lead?
Well, no, I don't think it does, not on the face of it. I guess what I'm saying is the Treasury Department needs to be proactive in trying to get information and demonstrate the value that it brings across the organization, which is what has just been said. And I think you can't necessarily wait to the CFO to say, "Oh, guys, I want you to do this." Now, I mean, obviously, if a CFO comes in and will say what he expects of everybody, but I think it's up to the treasurer to take the lead on these things. And I've seen the awareness grow amongst other departments of what can be added by that kind of approach over the course of time. And also, another one in terms of helping the CFO. At the moment, the company I'm in has a very entrepreneurial chief executive. He knows his product. He's a brilliant engineer. He knows his revenue. He knows a bit his P&L. Doesn't really care about the balance sheet. And this is my job, to help the CFO position the company with the chief executive such that the chief executive doesn't say, "Well, we've got this much cash, therefore I can go and spend it on this acquisition," to put some metrics down, I think, with the CEO and the board to make sure that they're say, "Well, yes, but you can do that, but this is going to create this cash flow issue, or this is how we can fund it." And that's a dialogue that goes through the CFO to the CEO in my. But again, depends on the company. Just that's the way it is where I am at the moment.
Okay. And maybe exploring some further practical steps on how we can achieve this from within Treasury. And you also alluded to it, but maybe question to Mike. I mean, do you have shared KPIs, metrics with the other functions that align everyone towards a common goal?
No, we don't have shared KPIs, but we do have one single planning cycle. And we all contribute to the forecast. So it's not just FP&A and business controlling who contribute. Everybody is part of it. That also means, I would say, for the CFO, to ensure that everybody has access to the same information. So we have very regular staff meetings where everybody gets update on the operational side, on the forecast, on the strategy. As soon as something changing, it's being communicated. So every finance department within Allseas has the same access to information. And then on top of that, you need people there, the key stakeholders that are very collaborative. You know, collaborative is the norm. It's not like, yeah, let's do something together, a little workshop, and then that's the end. No, it's a continuous cycle where we work together, and that really helps.
So sounds like for you collaboration, but also access to the same shared, can we say, real-time data information seems to be the secret sauce.
Yeah, absolutely. So nobody's left behind on the information side, which I think is very important. And I also had a look a bit at like maybe you can get a better understanding of different positions if people rotate around a bit. But I really came to the realization that a business controller is not an FP&A person, and an FP&A person is not a treasury person. So I tried, but it was not a big success actually on that side. So.
No, I think what you mentioned, working capital, that is really where we have to look at as treasurers. In the company that I worked for, Savvy Games Group, we have a very short balance sheet. We don't have receivables, we don't have payables, we don't have anything. We just have intangibles, which is a horror for banks because they don't like us because they can never claim any money from us. But basically, every month when we make Monopoly Go or Pokemon Go or that kind of products, we get one deposit from Apple Store, one deposit from Google Store, and there's no receivables. It's lovely. But working capital in traditional companies, if you look at traditional companies and you have the full OTC and PTP cycle, the inventory management, my recommendation was always, engineers, they have a very interesting concept, which is mass balance, basically counting the kilos rather than counting the dollars. Who of you is an engineer? Here, that's nice people. Engineers have this concept of mass balance where basically you put the recipe of the product that you make, you put it in and you see where the kilos are going in the output and you make sure that there's no leakage or spillage or inefficiencies. And if you look at your accounts receivable, if you look at your accounts payables, where is the money stuck? Where is the money stuck? In receivables, in internal receivables, intercompany receivables, in intercompany payables, in inventory. And inventory, there can be many inventories. There can be raw materials, intermediate goods, work in progress. And you cannot just push and push on working capital if most of it is work in progress, because work in progress you cannot sell. And for that reason, a good understanding of working capital is often very superficial. Let's get better working capital. Well, you forget that you have the machines full with stuff, and you have raw materials that you cannot sell, and you have accounts payables that are often intercompany. Remember, most people sell to their sister companies. Working capital has to be better understood, and I have the feeling that we can learn a lot from the engineers in working capital management rather than from financial people who say, oh, let's reduce working capital by 20%. No, it's like saying, let's have less rain in Amsterdam, no?
Okay. And then maybe explore a bit the topic of talent. So Mike, in fact, I heard you, if I understood correctly, you said, okay, making an FP&A person a treasurer and vice versa will not happen. But I mean, can measures on the talent side at least foster a bit of understanding for the different views and how to live that in an organization?
Sorry, you mean measures on the? Sorry, I didn't get it.
Like talent from a talent point
side.
of view.
Oh yeah.
Rotation.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I do in my team on FP&A and Treasury is that sometimes it happens not that often, but gets a bit more quiet, and then I, especially on the treasury people, I try to do them little projects outside the treasury and more into accounting, like optimizing processes on the AP side, something completely different, just to also to get a better understanding. But for me, I would rather send the talents out in the organization and have them talk with the innovations part, you know, work temporarily I think business partners are the best situated because they really get to know one specific thing of the business, and then coming into FP&A, that works well. But yeah, Treasury, FP&A, I don't know. Most Treasury people on the accounting side is not their strength, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
It's I agree. It's a challenge. I think that in Treasury at the moment, again, reference was made this morning to the challenges that we face in KYC, sanctions, and you have these young guys, if you're lucky, you have young guys who are trying to handle that, and it just keeps them so busy. It's important to pull them away from that and give them some other interesting things, but those challenges that we face in Treasury are tough at the moment and make, it's up to the banks to a certain extent to help us on that, but then we've been saying that for the last 5 or 10 years anyway. We're not making much progress. I totally agree. It's just the practicalities of it are a bit limited. I try and take some time out to show people just basic things about looking at P&Ls and balance sheet and understanding them, but it's not easy.
By the way, my latest 2 hires were data analysts. So, and that's also interesting because they have no financial background at all. So that's also very interesting.
Okay.
Well, I think it's a very broad curriculum of understandings that a treasurer need to know. He has to understand, we already concluded that data analytics. He has to understand tax and taxation. He has to understand concepts, legal concepts. Of course, it's always nicer if he's not a lawyer, but he has to understand basic concept of legal contracts. And so between that, he's still a finance guy, so or a girl. And so he also has to understand the finance part. So you have a very complex person. And the strange thing is, I haven't seen any, of course for accounting, you can do an accounting course on any university. I have seen very little universities that offer a treasury course. Yes. And there are few, I know Free University is offering something, but in general you have MBAs for FP&A, you have people who go into modeling and mathematics and econometrics, where you can have some understanding. But for treasury, there's no full-fledged university degree. Oh. And it should be done. It should be done because it combines several of these sub-disciplines between legal, fiscal, finance, and let's not forget technology. You have to be able to speak the bits and the bytes with the IT department. And you don't have to be a technician yourself. You can hire Sanders for that. But you have to be able to understand how the connectivity is done with these systems and with these rapidly changing systems and interfaces that are happening. So yes, I would say we have to train our treasuries better, and that often makes them not a specialist. It will make them compatible with many multidisciplinary areas.
Yeah. So I could listen to the 3 of you forever, but I'm being reminded of the time, and therefore I would like to ask each of you to maybe have your secret sauce advice for the audience on, I don't know, as a treasurer, how to get more integrated, or maybe as a CFO, what you should do to close off this session.
Well, very quickly from my side, touching on treasury, I think treasury is a super area for people to come into. There was a guy I bumped in from SAP consulting, and he said, well, how can I attract people into this? All the smart guys say it's not sexy enough, but I think it's probably one of the most interesting times I can think of to come into treasury, with everything that's going on with AI, with integration, all of the opportunities across it with the fintechs. But the one thing I would say, again, coming back to a comment made this morning, is I think the rewards for risk at the moment in the markets don't justify the risks of people taking. So just in terms of watch out for the risks, we learn from history that we don't learn from history is one quote from my side, I think.
I think I'll come back on the collaboration side. So I believe that by active collaboration with key stakeholders inside and outside finance ensures that Treasury will move from its traditional role as the safeguarder of cash, liquidity, risk, and really put Treasury at the strategic table.
I agree. It is what Paul said. It's never been such an interesting time to be a treasurer. When I lived in the US, at a certain moment I stopped going to the AFP, which is the Treasury Association, because it was always the same. We can cut better checks than last year, and that technology was never changing. At this moment, you cannot skip 1 year. You have to go every quarter to update yourself. And it's going so fast. If you have the breadth for it, absorb anything that you can learn about AI, absorb anything that you can learn about analytics, absorb anything that you can learn about risk. It's going much faster than you. And only the ones who are really involved in information, in compliance, and in liquidity management can be the next generation of treasurer. Absorb everything you can.
On that note, thank you so much for these insights. Very much appreciated. Maybe a round of applause for Maaike, Patrick, and Paul. Thank you.